Tarkir block is one of Magic's most talked about play experiences, known for its fetch lands, colour wedges, and for its format warping cards. But its narrative was equally ambitious. Coming off the back of Return to Ravnica and original Theros, it had to live up to the hype, and it attempted to do so with epic story arcs, time travel, and of course, dragons. Today we look at the 2015 Kelly Diggs story Khanfall and explore the plane's most iconic characters during their most dire hour. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I am your host Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we are going to be doing our MTG Book Club episodes. So I think this is our third one. I could be wrong. But today we are talking about a story that I absolutely fucking love. I've dropped the F-bomb this early in the episode because I'm excited. Today we're going to be talking about the we're going to be talking about the 2015 Kelly Diggs pen story Khanfall, part of the Khans of Tarkir block of stories, back when we had 3 set blocks, which meant we got 3 set blocks worth of storyline, and this is the kind of apex of the Fate Reforged block, I suppose, going into Dragons of Tarkir, right? So we had Khans of Tarkir, then it's Fate Reforged, then it's Dragons of Tarkir. This is the story that kind of brings us into the Dragons of Tarkir era of the storyline. I absolutely love this story. I think I've read this story like 5-6 times. Like, what about you?
Yeah, it gave me flashbacks rereading it today. There were bits that I read, I was like, oh man, I remember that line resonating, or I remember thinking, oh, that's really cool. I distinctly, it's the, what I like to call the Pokemon card effect, of where every now and again I'll look at a Pokemon card and it will remind me of how I felt about Pokemon cards back when I was like, 6 or 7 or whatever. And you get those same kind of weird bubbly feelings whenever I see a shiny Machamp, and it had that like spirally blue-red kind of shininess behind it. This gave me the same kind of feelings. It sent me back, to 2015, and I remember really being so enamored with what they were doing with the story, how they were handling sets, before everything got a bit weird and messy as things are now. But in the simpler days, it were.
This story is sort of as being part of the Tarkir block, both Theros and Tarkir, which came after Ravnica, Return to Ravnica, because I started playing Magic with you during Return to Ravnica era 2012. I wasn't actually as invested in the storyline and the Vorthos side of things until after all this kind of wrapped up. Funnily enough, I think it was sort of around like Amonkhet, I would say, and then like Shadows over Innistrad and all that kind of period where I really started to dive super heavy into the storyline for Magic the Gathering. So I actually came back to this story after pretty quickly after I was like, oh no, actually the whole story of Magic is actually kind of something that I'm really interested in, and to reread the entirety of the Tarkir block, because the Tarkir stories are still on the mothership fairly obviously, whereas a lot of the story articles that are on the website, you have to go hunting for. Like, they still physically exist, but they're just not existing on like their story page. Why would the stories exist on the story page? But I think this is the first, unless they've changed it again, this is the first arc of stories that is still on there before they start doing like their more modern era of stories, and like the kind of War of the Spark era stories. So I was able to read the whole thing from start to finish. And yeah, like I will say, as much as I love the Tarkir stories, and I think we were talking about this episode before the episode started, the set got a little bit of flack, right? Because people were a little bit about the time travel stuff. But the stories are great. There is some, what I would call anime filler in the Tarkir stories, if only because there are big plot points and beats that you want to get to. This is absolutely one of those big plot points and beats. And, it's such a good story.
Yeah, there's a lot of sledgehammer moments in this storyline. Like I've got the Khanfall open. I've also got the story of Tarkir, kind of like the blocks story arc kind of listed down as well, because it kind of gives you a drive-by of all 3 sets and kind of the stories and everything. And there are some big-ass moments. I mean, the reason why this arc was so important, right, it was the regeneration of Ugin and bringing him back into the storyline, because he was gone and no one knew why. And then obviously when Soren has to go and find him and finds just his carcass and kind of has that moment. It was a big part of essentially what Wallace's downfall, what it all came to. You know, this was the foiling, the thing that Wallace didn't expect. You know, his brother coming back from the dead, being able to even get a little glimpse of the crux of fate moment in a story. Like when this is the thing, like going back in time is not something that Magic shies away from. Like we haven't had it a lot because timey-wimey stuff's a bit done, and it's usually a bit retconny. It feels a bit cheap. It feels like there's no consequences. Blah blah blah. None of that happens in this. Not only is it not cheap, it's deliberate. It's been teased. It has massive payoff, and everything that happens actually matters because it changes an entire set. Like it literally goes, so we made Khans of Tarkir. Well, no, now we've made Dragons of Tarkir, and yes, dragon washing a set is like, you know, which is essentially what it is, right? That's what they did, is they dragon washed an entire set, and that kind of maybe rubbed people out the wrong way. I think in terms of gameplay, cool, yeah, whatever, I don't really care. This is a story episode, but in terms of like story implications, I think it was handled very well and done to perfection. And we'll talk about this as we talk through this story. Like the ending of this story has some real like curtain cool moments in it, and it's really nice.
Yeah, I think the gameplay of the set, it's a funny one. I think people look back on it now with fond memories because I think, you know, you had Tarkir standard was a pretty powerful standard with cards like Siege Rhino knocking around, and I think,
oh god, yeah.
Yeah, I think it had obviously some card warping, format warping cards, but I think generally, I think the standard and limited formats are actually quite fondly thought of. But the problem is that I think Theros and Tarkir had to battle with the like gargantuan popularity of Return to Ravnica and having, you know, factions allied with colors and, you know, having their own like personality, you know, just seemed a bit like too close thematically. So I think thematically people were a little bit touch and go. The time travel stuff didn't really grab a lot of people, but I do think what people did like was the kind of East Asian inspired stuff and like the kind of Central Asian steppe aesthetic as well. So you know, it was kind of hit and miss. Some of it was really good, some of it didn't grab people, but I think looking back on it now, I think we take for granted just how cool these stories were. I'm just going to go into a little bit of a story breakdown. Before I do that, I'm going to talk about Kelly Diggs very quickly. So Kelly Diggs, for those who don't know, up until 2018, which is when he left the company, was one of the like most instrumental employees at Magic the Gathering Wizards of the Coast. Started their life off as a writer of Star City Games, and then an editor for the Pro Tour coverage team. Then they are in Magic R&D, designing and developing sets. Like if you look at their back catalogue, there's things like World Wake, Arch Enemy, Plane Chase, Commander 2015, Dual Decks. You've got Eldritch Moon to Throne of Eldraine to Dominaria, and then they've developed a whole bunch of different sets, like all different kinds of products. Amazing. They are also on the creative team under Jenna Helland at this point in time. So this is 2015 story. I think they had already jumped to the creative team outside of R&D and playtesting. So if there's anyone that's going to be writing stories for Magic the Gathering in this period of time, if we sort of talk about Alison Lurs being like the quintessential Magic writer for story during around the time of Ixalan, Kelly Diggs, along with Jen Helland, are the quintessential writers at this period of time for Magic the Gathering. So if anyone's going to do a big sledgehammer moment in the storyline, Kelly Diggs is the one you want to have to it. Khanfall, as I say, is the kind of pivotal moment of like the Fate Reforged storyline. So there is like a whole block of stories before and indeed after this, but I think we're talking about this one because it is just such a cool story. Just a little bit of a preamble then for the Tarkir timeline for this story. Nathan, I know you've got a more detailed breakdown, but this is just my kind of like little chip in. So before this point, we've had Sarkhan Vol, the Planeswalker, who has travelled back into Tarkir's ancient past. So at the end of the Khans of Tarkir stories, he's travelled back in time. And what he's done is he's saved Ugin the Spirit Dragon from death at the hands of Nicol Bolas, which is something that had not previously happened in the original Tarkir timeline. So in the original Tarkir timeline, Bolas and Ugin fight, and Bolas kills Ugin, which stops the dragon storms, which is how the dragons on Tarkir are born, which leads to the eradication and extinction of the dragons at the hands of the clan races, and the Khans of Tarkir overtake the plane of Tarkir. But with Sarkhan basically stopping Ugin's death, so Ugin loses the battle, but then goes into a cocoon-like state, and without Ugin's regulation or indeed death, the dragon storms are supercharged, which leads not only to the birth of the dragons that would have been birthed anyway, but almost like a ramping up of the amount of dragons that are being birthed into Tarkir. This, in turn, leads to the dragons and not the clans rising to power. So obviously, that is kind of a very succinct way of saying there's a whole bunch of shit where Sarkin bounces around Tarkir feeling all sad because Nicol has tricked him. I mean, saying sad, he was driven literally insane.
Mm.
But this
Yeah,
is
he was Sarkin
Sarkin.
the mad, not Sarkin the sad.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very, very apt. But the Khans of Tarkir block was him basically looking for repentance, not understanding that he was used and abused by Bolos in previous storylines. Because Sarkin's actually quite an old character. Like, you forget
Mm.
about it, but he's been in the story for a long time. And this is his way of thinking, I'm going to set things right. I'm going to save Ugin because Ugin's essence has been kind of plaguing his mind. I'm going to save Ugin, and that's going to set everything correct because he wants to see dragons like rule the skies again. But what he doesn't count on is, that classic time travel thing. If you sneeze on a butterfly, then the mutant dinosaurs riding on the back of, star raptors are going to come and blow up your planet with laser beams. Like, that's what's going to happen. So,
Mm.
unfortunately, this is what happened to him. We get into the main story, and it's actually a relatively simple story, but a lot does happen. So, the ancient Khans of Tarkir are called to a Jeskai stronghold at the behest of Shu Yun, who is the Jeskai Khan, so the red, white, and blue Khan. And they're going to debate a solution to the dragon menace. So, the dragon storms have been happening for as much as they can think, for like decades and decades. So they are finally coming to the end of extinction, and they want to try and think of a way to stop the dragons from wiping out the clans. Dagatar, who was the Abzan Khan, has already cowed to the dragons. So in a previous story, we see that the Abzan leader, to protect his people, has already succumbed to the will of the dragons. And Rayan, the last of the Abzan, is a rebel faction leader who acts as the Abzan Khan at this meeting. We also have Yasova, who represents the Temur, Lesha, who represents the Mardu, and Tasigur, who represents the Sultai.
Boo.
Shuyin, boo, Tasigur. Hey, you play a Tasigur commander deck,
Yeah,
so
and
don't talk
boo.
to me.
Fucking boo, Tasigur. Okay.
We have Shuyin, who instructs a scribe of his to record the entire event. I think the scribe's name is Quan. So in the corner, recording this point of history, we have one of his scribes. After some debate and distrust, which is going to happen between enemy clans coming together, the seeds of alliance do start to form, and Yasova tells the Khans of her role under the influence of Bolos in the role of Sarkin in the fight between Bolos and Ugin, and the saving of Ugin's life that led to the dragon storms, which is what I just described. Yasova is actually being deceived at this point by Bolos to try and kill Ugin. So she is part of Bolos's plan to kill Ugin, and she eventually gets stopped by Sarkin, and the whole thing unravels. Just as the meeting reaches its apex, the stronghold is attacked by two dragon broods, led by dragon lords Ojutai and Silumgar. The Khans realize that the attack is actually coordinated, which is unusual for dragons, because the dragons of Tarkir are at this point still quite territorial, and so they suspect that there's a betrayal by one of the Khans. They think that someone has told the dragons that the Khans are all meeting in one place, which has led to a temporary truce between the dragons to attack this stronghold. Shuyin takes the scrolls that have the recording of the events way to be hidden. Alessia, Rayan, and Yasova fight the dragons, and Tasigur has disappeared. Shuyin hides the scrolls underground and gives his life and the life of his elite soldiers. Is it the Ghost Fire? Dragon Fire? Yeah, it's Ghost Fire.
Dragonflies.
It's Ghost Fire.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's they are dragon slayers with a dragon tattoo, which is the mark of a Ghost Fire warrior. Sorry, lots of dragons and fires going on in this. So, Shuyan gives up the life of him and his Ghost Fire warriors to Ojutai in return for the rest of his clan's safety. So he understands that he can't beat the dragons. He's hidden away the history. He thinks that's good enough for now, and he basically buys the rest of his clan's safety with his own life. Ojutai agrees, but decrees that all mention of the clans and the Khans are to be scrubbed from history, and that those words become taboo. And this, we learn through other means, is also the will of the other dragons. So the dragons are not content with just killing off the clans and taking them over. They literally want to rewrite Tarkir's history, which seems to be a bit of a theme for dragons when they come to, when they want to dominate a plane. They kind of want to destroy the history that's come before it. It's badass and horrible in equal measure.
Mm.
Finally, we see that the dragons win the battle overall, and we see that not only has Ojutai conquered the Jeskai, but the former Abzan Khan Dagatar, who's still in one of the Abzan strongholds, we see reading a letter delivered to him talking about how Rayan died saving the other Khans, so this effectively ends the Abzan rebellion as well. Yasova offers to hunt for a Tarkir, who's the Dragon Lord, essentially for the Teamer, rather than fight her. Alesha has a moment of primal understanding with Kolagan, who seems not want to rule the former Mardu, but instead challenge them to quote unquote keep up. So there's a brilliant scene which we'll talk about where Kolagan, the Dragon Lord for the Mardu, flies past Alesha and her cohort, and instead of killing them, gives them just an instance of being like, I'm not going to kill you, but you're going to need to keep up with me if you want to live. And so they take that kind of opportunity. And then we see Tasigur, who is indeed revealed to be the traitor of the Khans, receiving his perceived...
No.
I know, shock horror. He is receiving his perceived promised pride of place by Silumgar's side, which is in fact becoming one of his trophies. And although it's not stated in the story, we do see in the Dragon Lord Silumgar's card that Tasigur is now part of a necklace that Silumgar wears around their neck. And so that effectively puts the Sultai back in the hands of the Naga and Rakshasa. Obviously, de facto dragons, but they're the ones who kind of reclaim the clan from the humans. And that is kind of the story. The Khans meet up, they decide they're going to help each other, Tasigur betrays them, the dragons come and kill them all, and the clans basically become extinct. And then we go from having the 3-color clans into the 2-color dragon, I suppose, clans, although they actually ban the word clan as well.
Brood, isn't it?
Brood, there we go, thank you, Dragon Brood. And the histories on the scrolls, which Shu Yun has hidden beneath one of the Jeskai strongholds, is laid ready and waiting for a now altered history. Narset, thank you very much, to find and discover the kind of altered history, effectively. Although for her, I suppose it's not necessarily an altered like timeline, but more of a history that came before that's now been scrubbed out by the dragons, which is kind of just as good as sort of saying, oh, this is what you could have won. But yeah, there's debate as to whether she actually sees an alternate timeline or just her timeline's other potential. But that's time travel for you.
Yeah, timey-wimey stuff.
Timey-wimey stuff. I mean, unfortunately, when you're talking about Tarkir, time travel stuff in general, I think I've spoken about this before, I really can't be doing with time travel films and time travel media. The only time travel media in recent years that I've seen where I've been like, oh yeah, actually that's fine, is the film Looper with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis.
Interesting.
Because there's a scene where they're in a diner and they play the same character, but one's an old person from the future and one's a young person from the present. And the young person from the present is going, but can you just explain to me how this all works? Aren't we in like a paradox? And Bruce Willis's older character goes, look, I could just explain it to you, or we could just get the fuck on with what we're doing. And he just, just brushes past it. And you're like, yes, thank you. We get the premise. Yeah. Let's just move on. So yeah. This story is rad, even just from the premise. This story is excellent, don't you think?
Absolutely, yeah. I really like this, the focus they have on the idea that the history is the most important thing. I remember when I first read this, I was a surfer of MTG Salvation. I know it's back again, but it still feels like, in my mind, I still feel like it died, and I still feel like it's gone and forgotten. I guess it's just I don't post on there anymore. But there was a guy that I used to reload a post about called Kwan, who was a writer. And when this story came out, they lost their absolute shit at how much of a relevant character they were and how much it kind of played towards them as a person. But I like that initial focus, this idea of like, write everything down, like let's document this history, because realistically our history is going to be changing. It's almost like Shu Yun knows that this is like the point, like, he understands what's happened. He doesn't know the specifics, right? Because that's why Yasova is to kind of just tell the truth, and so everyone knows exactly what happened. But I feel like Shu Yun understands that this is like, the crux. I mean, this is the pinnacle, the as you say, the apex of the arc, and it's so devastating. At the time, you didn't know what was going to come afterwards, right? You didn't know what the next step was going to be. So it kind of, especially when everyone really liked. I mean, I still think that the Khan set played very well. I like the balance they did with the wedges and all that nonsense. Like, it was the first time we had a wedge set. So it was quite nice to kind of it was nice to have like a different take on it in Fate Reforged, and then kind of know that it's never going to be the same again. To have that kind of drop and that kind of that actual like metaphorical presence in the story is really good. Like I think it delivers the story really well. It didn't need to be super complicated. It just
No.
needed to kind of wrap it up in a way that felt satisfying, because there were some really big moments in the stories that led up to it. And we've got a little drive by all of the old Khans as they were, because obviously the newer Khans in Khans of Tarkir are changed, and we see them all in a different way. In Dragons of Tarkir, you've got obviously Zergo Bellstriker, you've got Sidisi as a zombie Naga, that kind of thing. Like you see differences. Obviously, Narset's a planeswalker now instead of being a 3-color obnoxious commander monstrosity.
Sure, yeah. Well, Narset's journey is like, without the revelation of an altered history, her perception of like the multiverse isn't necessarily challenged, and so she just grows up to become an enlightened master on Tarkir. I think with some sort of knowledge of like multiverses and universes beyond, because Tarkir's full of mystics that kind of know these things. But then in Dragons of Tarkir, because she's still in training almost underneath the Ojutai, that when she discovers, oh fuck, like this wasn't how things were necessarily meant to be, brain go what, and then Planeswalker happens. So then she kind of ultimately transcends. And she becomes Narset transcendent. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting like her existence is almost greater, but even though her life was for a time a lot lesser, like and I think it's very cool, like sort of seeing all these different changes.
Yeah, I guess to be fair, the first timeline she dies, right? Zergo, and this was the other thing. There was actual merit to the character, like individual individual like interactions. Like when Narset and Zergo, we only really saw for like one set. Yes, okay, we saw them again in Dragons, but like the relationship that Sarkhan had with Zergo was really nice. The fact that Sarkhan and Narset kind of almost had this kind of bond, and then the fact that she died, that was again a tragic moment. I feel like no, and then he gets warped, and it's a roller coaster.
Did she die? This is the crux of the multiple Narset theory. Is that we don't know what kind of damage timelines has had.
She appears to have died. Even in this story, even in the summary here, like in the story of Tarkir Block, it says that she dies, or at least Zergo kills her. Again, they might. I mean, nothing's canon really. Right?
I mean, a lot of the big signifiers for having the multiple Narsets have come and gone without much event. From like a year and a half ago when we had Vorthos Mycon and we were riffing with like, there are multiple Narsets maybe, and all of the things, all the opportunities for there to be multiple Narsets haven't emerged, but I'm still holding out hope. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think subtlety is the issue that the Magic story has at the moment, right? If it doesn't, I mean, I guess we'll see. We'll see after another year of it. But I mean, considering things like the difference in how they handle like Theros 1 with Theros 2, I don't think we're going to necessarily have the same kind of nuance to the story beats and the same kind of like, we fed you this like all these years ago. I really hope they do. But I mean, I would love to see multiple Narsets. I think that'd be really, really cool.
I think that'd be really cool. I'll tell you the biggest thing that I like about this story from a structural point of view. And Kelly, if you're listening out there, because you did actually share this post when we posted up that we were going to do this episode. Thank you very much. We've had quite a lot of interaction with you on Twitter, actually. Is the story doesn't make this because this is only one episode of a story, right? This isn't like a 2-hour film or whatever. So they haven't made the storyline. The Khans fight and bicker for an episode, and then the story ends with them all being killed by the dragons. Because what I hate in a lot of fantasy media, and I think it's just because of the amount of media that we consume, obviously you see the storyline again and again, is when you have all the meetings of all like the big barbarian leaders and all the warlords and all like the sort of horde chiefs and blah, 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 blah. So much time is put into them going, I don't trust you. Oh, I don't trust you. Well, this menace isn't even real, blah, 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 blah. Whereas as an audience, usually by this point in a given story, in my head, I'm thinking of things like Game of Thrones, but this is also in lots of films as well. We know that X, Y, and Z threat is real, and that the only way they're going to defeat it is by coming together. But we spend so much time having the characters catch up that, for my personal taste, I am so done with it. I have watched enough anime, I have watched enough Shakespeare plays, and I have watched enough fantasy warlord media to be so done with the audience dramatic irony. We know that there's a threat, they just need to get over their own egos thing. So to have this story be like the Khans meet, they're already in a position where they know they have to work together. They rib each other a little bit. They suspect one another of betrayal when it's reasonable to do so. But for the 80% of this story, they're going, right, let's fight together. Kick ass, Khans, like twin power activate,
Yeah,
I think, just get to it, get to the story. And it absolutely does. And this story could have very easily been half an article of Well, I don't trust Tasker. Well, I don't trust you, Alesha. Meh, 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 meh. Oh, look, there are the dragons. Whereas in actuality, it's about a half a paragraph's worth of text of that kind of nonsense, and they just
Yeah.
get to it. And it's cool, it's good, it's dynamic. We don't need to. We know the clans don't like each other. We know the Khans are distrustful, but they've come to a point in the story where they need to meet, and that as a baseline is a really good starting point. We don't waste time having them know that the dragons are about. They know the fucking
Mm.
dragons are about, so they're able to get into the story quicker. And I absolutely
Yeah.
loved it. I think if it wasn't as immediate as it was, the story would have been ruined just from the point baseline. I think it wouldn't have
Mm.
worked. So I'm really happy that that's where we started.
Yeah, there was a lot of snappy interactions between the Khans as well. Because again, we've seen each of them kind of in their own individual stories, but seeing just a little interaction between like Alesha and Tasigur is really cool. Like, it's nice seeing like Yasova arrive. And the best thing, this is my favorite line. This has made me love Shuyan immediately. I'm really sad we didn't get to see more of him. And give me a moment. Just gonna. Ask all of them to meet me here in 1 hour, said Shuyan, under minimal guard. He would learn a great deal from who arrived first and what sort of guard each of the Khans considered minimal. Like, that is so, like, playing the Grandmaster kind of thing. And he's not doing it out of, like, this is the thing I like about Shuyan. He's almost, like, knowledgeable. It's almost like the burden of knowledge, right? Of where he's almost the exasperated parent going, okay, I know what's likely to be happening here. What really annoys me is that he wasn't able to see through Tasker's deception, because that seems, like, obvious, right? And so those saying that at the beginning of the story, I remember that one of them betrayed them. And I couldn't remember. I was like, was it still Yasova under the influence of Bola? So I mean, it was still a little bit of of course it was Tasigur because he brought too many guardsmen, right? But
well, okay, so let's talk a little about that then, because Tasigur has been one of the breakout characters of the Tarkir block, not least because his Planeswalker card, not least because his legendary creature card is one of the most playable in the DH format, right? Out of all of the different Khans of this era, I think Alesha's pretty playable, but I think she got kind of overplayed for for a while there, because very powerful Mardu commander. Now Mardu's got a few other things going on, like not so much played. I think Shuyun was like, or One Punch Man as like people call
One Punch Man, yeah.
Very cool. Yusova's not as playable really, and Ran got a card in the partner commander set. And then Dagata is almost unplayable as a commander unless you're playing like something very janky. Like obviously nothing's unplayable in EDH, but it just doesn't see play, right? That's the fact of it. Whereas Tasigur, you have a Tasigur deck, like, but if we don't even necessarily focus on that, Tasigur is genuinely one of the most popular commanders out there in the format. So people focus on them as a character and they want to know about it. I produced a video like a few weeks ago for our Lore Shots video, where we look at individual commanders and look at their sort of quick backstory. We do like 2-minute videos. Tasker's one of our videos that we've done because people really want to know what they're about. And obviously, like, it's all tied in with things like the Sultai aesthetic is kind of grimly funny. There's lots of artworks of like zombies with fruit baskets on their head, right? Do you know what I mean? So Tasker is like a very big character. So I think Tasker is one of the characters that I think they didn't need to hide in this story that Tasker was the villain. They turn up, they're an asshole, they disappear immediately, and it's like, yeah, of course it's fucking Tasker. But again, I think we know that as an audience because we know that. And I think it's actually very clever that Kelly Diggs has made Tasker the villain to kind of keep the story moving. But the fact that Tasker, during the meeting, in world, in character, is still fully on board with the plan to stop the dragons. They're all talking about, well, should we bust open Ugin's cocoon? Should we wake him up? Should we try and save him? Should we kill him, like, to stop the dragon storms? And Tasker keeps chipping in, being like, yeah, I'm on board. Like, I'm being an arsehole about it, but I am still on board. So the characters are like, well, obviously Tasker's not going to betray us because he's got just as much to lose as the rest of us, without necessarily thinking that he would ever deem to side with the dragons,
Well, without realizing that he'd already lost it, right? That's the thing.
Well, sure,
like
yes.
the Abzan's much more obvious. That was what's surprising, was that Daggertar was the first to bend the knee, because it's the adamant. He was Daggertar the adamant, and he wasn't. he was flimsy. He was Daggertar the flimsy.
Well,
and obviously
I'm a bit softer on Daggertar. He did what he needed to do, I feel.
Oh man, like this is one of the things that was kind of annoying.
Khans do it at the end of the story. All the Khans that aren't dead
Yeah, but they
To
don't give
me,
up
the
the
dragons.
entirety of their. They don't kill off like, or say kill off their already spirits, but they don't. He doesn't banish the entirety of their ancestral line. Like that's huge.
Well,
What a
do
little.
you? Yeah,
Oh,
but do you sacrifice the will of the dead for the will of the living? I think that's a fair trade.
he
The
didn't
will of
even
the
give it a chance. I mean, yeah, okay, cool. No,
whatever.
exactly. Well, look, we're arguing the intentions of fictional characters. I'm just annoyed a little bit that we weren't going to be able to talk about it
What have we been
properly.
doing for this entire podcast if not arguing the intentions of fictional characters?
True. Yeah, fair
Don't take.
enough.
We're 76 episodes in, my boy. Like we're way past that.
Right, fine. Well, let's double down then. Right, yeah. No, but it's one of those things of when I did like to reintroduce myself to the storyline, I was like, oh fuck, I forgot Daggerter did that. What a douche. Like, I mean, you can't. I don't think you can minimize just how. I mean, I guess that was the point, right? If the dragons are pushed to the brink, because it even says at the top of the episode, it's been a few years, right, since the tempest kind of increased. This isn't next week, right? This has been a few years, and clearly the because of the problem with Khans of Tarkir, we haven't mentioned this at all. The problems with Khans of Tarkir is that the planet was kind of like dying out without the dragons, without that kind of balance. It wasn't. It was a world of ruin and war, right? Like it wasn't a good place to be in. And as much as Sarkhan didn't do anything wrong, kind of thing, is a bit of a meme. Like realistically, neither of the eventualities that we're seeing, either the Dragonstorms growing or the Dragonstorms being eradicated, neither of those things are going to make the plane better, right? So maybe this agreement, this cohesion between the two, the dragons and the humans and everything, is necessary. Which is another interesting point: is that why are the humans like kind of the only ones who are kind of against the dragons? You've got Avon, you've got like the Naga, you've got like different species within each clan are kind of allied towards the dragons already.
Sure, yeah. So to kind of clarify on that, because I know what you mean, but it is a bit more complicated, I suppose, if you haven't read the stories. So obviously the humans aren't the only non-dragon species on Tarkir. You have many different anthropomorphic, like the Ainok are like the kind of hound people, the Avon are the bird people, the Naga are the snake people, you've got Jinns, you've got all these different things, Rakshasa. But you're right, there does seem to be at least one race in each clan along with humans. Humans are just a kind of given for fucking everything, but there's one non-human race that are kind of very quick to ally themselves with the humans. The Avons seem to be quite quick to ally themselves from the Jeskai. The Naga are quite quick to ally themselves with the Sultai. But I do think there are most of other races are actually kind of still on board, like you see with Alesha and with Usova especially, because the Temur and the Mardu are very sort of mixed species, mixed race. I don't know whatever the right word is for that. Creature types, so mixed creature types, that they are still fairly like, oh no, we're for the clan, not for the dragons. But I think there are certain species that maybe just have more to gain. The Avon, I'm not quite sure why, because Ojutai has an Avon translator, and a lot of the cards, and they actually get a creature card as well, don't they?
The Orator of Ujatai. Maybe Flaps just like sticking together, maybe like it's like Top Gun, that's one. Top Gun moment.
The Naga though, the Naga and the Rakshasa, who are the cat demons of the Sultai, always fancied themselves to be the true rulers of the clan anyway, and not necessarily for the sake of the clan either. Like the Naga in world consider themselves to be draconic in their origin. So the fact that the dragons are ruling what would become the Silumgar, but are kind of letting the snakes run the show with the Rakshasa demons in the background doing their demony stuff. I think that to them, that is kind of a status quo anyway. So, yeah.
Well, this was the beginning of this whole thing, right? Is that they tried to stage a coup against Tasigur, assassination attempt, and it was Tasigur's rebuttal that kind of turned the Naga and the Rakshasa away from him, left him alone to deal with the dragon threat, and that's what caused him to try and... I remember in his story, I think it ends with his like face being pushed down into the mud or something, right? Like into the subservience or something like that. It's really like degrading what happens to him. And obviously that was the kind of...
He was a
he absolutely 100%. But I also feel like it's one of these things of he was kind of in. He's mentioned as being quite young and being insolent and that kind of thing. I get that the way he handles himself is really bad. Maybe I'm just always sympathetic towards the douchebags. I don't understand why. But it's one of these things. I don't necessarily understand like how he could have not handled the situation without being the bigger man, and it's very obvious that he's not the bigger man. Like, and it was never going to go that way.
Yeah.
So it felt like an inevitability, right? That there was going to be this betrayal. One thing I think would have been really funny is, how like the first thing he says when he comes in is like, "Oh, so we are all here then." Now that's really telling. Imagine if he showed up and Ishuyun went, "Nah, no one else showed up," and he's like, "Oh, but I've got a dragon attack to come here and finish off the cut." I don't think it would have made a difference. I think they've kind of passed the point have had if they didn't have the Khan the meeting, then I don't think it would have been a positive way to come out of this and fix the problem anyway. And this was just kind of like the definitive blow that kind of just did it all in one sweep, right? Like, so I don't think it would have been a slower, more painful process, but I reckon it's the same situation would have occurred. In fact, maybe it would have occurred worse because there wouldn't have been this definitive "we've lost" moment. So all of the Khans, which are also interestingly all humans, right? That's the other thing, is all the Khans are humans. I mean, not in the original Khans of Tarkir, but in the Fate Reforged part, like
all of the ancient Khans of Tarkir are human.
Yeah, which is and maybe an interesting point, because maybe over the 1500 years? It's something like 1500 years, isn't it?
Yeah, it's thousands, yeah.
Yeah, across that time, maybe everything becomes a bit more diverse, because Zergo was the... so you had Zergo, you had Siddiqui, so there was maybe like, some more diversity when it came to like the Khan. Like, maybe that's the whole point, right? Is the Khan system got better and more involved and more accepting of other races. Maybe it was a broken system that was supposed to be broken.
Yeah,
but anyway.
I wonder if there was a design decision. I don't know. It's tough to say. Tasigur's entrance is one of my favorite lines, just from telling us something about this character and also where they are in their sort of life, if you like. The line reads: "Last to arrive, wheezing from the climb and bundled comically under 2 people's worth of furs, was Tasigur, the arrogant, treacherous Khan of the arrogant, treacherous Sultai." So, this image of this very slight man climbing, the Jeskai live in the mountains, right?
Mm.
So, for someone who spends their entire time in an opulent palace in a muggy, sweaty swamp.
Yeah.
Who spends most of their time with like a sort of skirt/kilt get up. I don't know what the correct term for it is. I'm sure there is one. But mostly unclothed, like eating grapes and whatever else, to have to go to a mountain and then climb a whole bunch of stairs to get to a meeting that he knows he's about to betray everyone at. It's just like, oh man, like that's just a bad time. And the fact that I wonder if I go back and forth as to whether the 2 people's worth of furs, is either him trying to show how well off he is, because he doesn't have any money at this point because his clan's abandoned him. So I wonder if he's like, look how many furs I have, or because he's so fucking cold.
Yeah, he's just so pathetic. One wasn't enough. One wasn't enough.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just funny. It's just funny. Like, you never think of Tasigur as being like unfit, because in their depictions in their cards, they're very slight.
Somehow a 4/5. That's the bit that I never understand. Tasigur could have been a 1/1, and that would have made sense to me. But 4/5, come on. But yeah.
Yeah. But very funny, very funny. Let's talk a little bit about Yasova and Shu Yun specifically, because I found their relationship in this very interesting. So, for the most part, other than Tasigur, as we discussed, and Rayan to a degree, I suppose, because Rayan isn't really a Khan. Rayan has proclaimed themselves the Khan because they don't have one.
Well, it's de facto, right?
De facto Khan, I suppose. That's still a bit debatable. But Yasova and... they're all still very respectful to each other, even though they are warring factions, because they understand the import of being a leader. It's almost like they're above their clan politics because they are like the adults at the adult table.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and that like their kids may fight, but they know that they need to maintain a balance. But Yasova and Shu Yun especially seem to be incredibly what's the word I'm thinking of?
Reverent.
Ooh. Reverent, thank you. I was going to say relevant, reverent to each other. And I kind of feel like, I mean, if you look at it from a color standpoint, Tima and Jeskai share 2 of their 3 colors, right? So I suppose that would make sense within a mechanical sense, in a very Mel sense. But I also sort of feel that out of the 5 clans, the 2 that understand the larger picture of the world would be the Tima and the Jeskai. The Jeskai, by being sort of respectful of history. I mean, the Abzan do to a degree with their ancestors, like they have a direct line to like the spirits of their ancestors. But for the Jeskai, it's about the story of what's happened is important to learn from as a study tool to affect the future. Whereas the Tima can access shamanic powers that allow them to see beyond their own confines of their own existence, be that within the plane or be that on other planes, as we find out in other stories that this can happen as well.
The unwritten now, as they call it.
The unwritten now, exactly. That is a term that gets brought up. So these 2 kind of very scholarly, and even though one of them from the tundra is kind of more of a nomadic people, whereas the other ones from the mountainous and lake regions are more like, more monk-like, I kind of feel like they are still on very much the same page, and they kind of understand that there's a larger picture. When Yasova reveals that she effectively had a massive part to do with this situation,
Yeah.
and it's
Wob
kind of her
wob.
fault in some ways. Shu Yun is very quick to slap down any sort of blame, not out of kind of like making her feel better, but because it's not important. And
Mm.
he understands that she understands by the virtue of the fact that she came out with this revelation that it's not important what happened, really. What happens is what's going on now and
Mm.
how we can affect change with the knowledge that we now have. And I really like that relationship between them. It's telling that Yusova turns up to the meeting without any guards. It's just her.
I think she expected to die there.
I
I
think
expect.
so too.
I think that she would have come in with the story, and then they would have killed her for her part in obviously, because there is a massive. We can't downplay the animosity between clans enough, right? The whole point is that in Khans of Tarkir, the set, like the clans are have warred so hard they've worn themselves into nothing, essentially, and that would have been what happened, regardless, had it not been for there to be this greater threat, and I reckon that's probably one of the only reasons why the LAI in the end is that they know that everything about their clan would die out if they don't find a different way to keep it, going on. And I think Yasova, I think she, as much as she is the Khan of the team, like the team are less, as you say, less organized, more nomadic. I don't think they'd have suffered for her dying. Though at the same time, when we get to the end, I think it's her that has the idea to appease Ataka. Which again, we'll talk about the individual dragons at the end as well, I think. But yeah, I don't think she expected to leave there alive.
No, but I think her accepting and her being able to give the knowledge of what had happened to the other Khans so they had a better chance to deal with the issue is part of it as well.
Yeah.
And I think her answering Shuyun's summons with that sort of intent kind of shows that I think the Teamer and the Jeskai, if Tarkir was to be rearranged and all but two clans stood, I think the best for the plane would be if the Jeskai and the Teamer were the only ones kicking around, because the other three couldn't, they're just doing their own thing, they can fuck off.
Yeah.
I think Tarkir would be a much more prosperous place if it was just those two clans just going you do your nomadic thing, we'll study martial arts in the mountains, it's all fine, it's all good. Quick little touch on Alessia. Alessia is another fan favorite character, not least because of their representation of being a trans woman, just being super cool. But Alessia as a character is fucking badass. The Truth of Names by James Wyatt is the other Fate Reforged story where we see Alessia. Again, that is a sick story. That there are lines in that story that I send shivers down my spine by how cool it is. It's the story of how Alessia became Khan and indeed became the person that they are today. So I would also suggest reading that Truth of Names story if you can find it. It's very easy to find. It's a very popular story. But Alessia kind of comes to this meeting not necessarily being troublesome, but certainly being the kind of stirring the pot teenager in the corner. If Tassigur's the child throwing his toys out the pram and Rayan is just out of their depth toddler, and then you have Yasova and Shu Yun being mum and dad, I think, Alessia is definitely the teenager that's I know what's expected of me, but also I'm not above accusing you of being a twat and pulling my sword out to prove it, which I kind of respect.
Yeah, I like the amount of times they mention her smiling or grinning. I'm like, good, because obviously her card name is Alessia who smiles at death. And I like the fact they keep bringing that up as a kind of it's a character defining trait of hers, which under all of these circumstances, and I guess it works for the Mardu, right? Because they're a bit more reckless. They don't necessarily care about consequences. It's more about living in the moment and all that nonsense. I also like the fact that she was the first to arrive. It kind of shows that she takes everything quite seriously, despite, and it's also another reverence, the reverence of her clanmates saying, "We follow you wherever you go." Even at the end, when she's seemingly doing something that's completely against what they would deem to be appropriate or even acceptable, they still follow her. So to have that again, the best way to show someone in power isn't to show them going, "I've got all the power." It's to show them what that power, how that power influences the people around them and the people that look up to them. Right, that's the best way to put someone on a pedestal. Is have someone else talk about how good they are, not have that person go, "Look at my pedestal that I can build for myself," and then they fall off of it. Whereas a pedestal built underneath you is usually a bit more stable. So I think
for sure,
she was really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean her immediacy and the immediacy, which again ties really well into the coloured try of Mardu, is they're kind of they are the the sort of aggressive hit now, like hit hard, hit fast, and like fuck off again. Like that is exactly how warriors on the step would act. That is exactly their tactics. Like they hit hard, they hit fast, they never stay still, they never make camp for more than a night. They don't have cities, they don't have villages because they don't need them, and all that is encompassed in Alessia. And there's a couple of lines, like you kind of mentioned at the very end of the story, where like, you know, they kind of follow her even though she's doing something very un-Mardu because she is just who she is. But I think what's very important with Alessia is that it's not like she expects anything from her clanmates. She does what she does, and if they want to follow her, then they do, and if they don't, they don't. And that in all encompassing of the Mardu spirit is the reason that they follow her. The line when she comes to the meeting, Shiyun says, "The Jeskai welcome you," said Shiyun, bowing. "And the Mardu rank and file told me you could stick it in your ear," said Alessia cheerfully. "But I'm here, and if you're willing to talk, I'm willing to listen. Hopefully they haven't chosen a new Khan yet." So she's not even, like, even if she's saying it maybe sarcastically, it's not like she's worried about the fact that, like, oh my god, I've got to do things right by my clan. She's going, look, I know as me, Alessia, that this needs to be done, and I am the Khan. If I'm not the Khan after this meeting, that's fine. But for right now, this is where I need to be, and this is what I need to be doing. And it's, you know, it's almost the opposite from Shiyun and Yusova, who have this kind of expanded knowledge of past, present, and like extra, like, you know, transient. That Alessia doesn't need any of that shit. She just needs to know where she is, what she's doing in the moment, and she's a powerful enough character that generally what she's doing in the moment is the right thing to do. And how can you not fucking love that? That is like, you could follow a whole series of stories just about Alessia and it'd be amazing.
I felt like the end, to keep quote, I'm going to talk about now anyway. The mirroring of that with Colligan as well, like the fact that they meet eyes, and it's always this understanding of like, look, it doesn't fucking matter all of this expectation of fighting, all of the expectation of battle, of who's going to win. It's like, I just want to do me. And Alessia almost sees that in the Colligan, and Colin sees that in Alessia, and Colligan's like, all right, well then follow along then, like, you know, try and keep up. And Alessia's like, well, let's go then. You know, that's such a cool moment, considering some of the other like conversations that there are between the dragons and the humans, you know, be it through having to understand what a roar means, to actually having an orator, you know, directly translate for you. That has the least amount of like active, like spoken communication, but they had the understanding between the two of them is greater kind of than any of the other understandings you kind of find from the other dragons. And it was one of those words where I'm like, this is why I like Mardu anyway. I think that's like, if I had to choose a wedge out of all of them, as much as, man, I really love Jessica, I think in my heart I'm more black than blue. So I really like Mardu anyway. So maybe that's a bit of bias, but I think that's a really cool interaction. They don't all just fall into subservience, right? Like, I'd have to read back how Dagatara and Dramoka interact. It's the only one we don't see, right? Because we've already technically seen that interaction.
No, not in this story. I think we saw it in a different one. Yeah,
you see it at the end of his story, and obviously you see Rayhan, who, spoilers, dies at the end of this, kind of defending two of the other Khans. So that story kind of gets wrapped up without having this kind of closing statement of the interaction between the humans and also the non-dragon clan and the dragons, and how that kind of resolves and gets a little bit of a conclusion before we kind of go, oh, okay, inevitably this is where that's going to go into Dragons of Tarkir. Out of all of them, I think that was the one that kind of made me smile the most. I'm like, cool, it doesn't all have to be conflict, right? There can be some spark of goodness within this block, which was essentially tragedy at one end, more tragedy in the middle, that then begets more tragedy again at the end, but a different type of tragedy. You know, so
I think the future of the clans moving from the Khan system into the Dragon system. You're right. So we have the Mardu become the Colligan and their whole thing. They pretty much have their same way of life, except they do it under no banner, and they are following the dragons sort of as storm chasers as opposed to being like marauders.
Dash mechanic obviously being prevalent.
Yeah, very cool. The Jeskai become the Ojutai, and again, their way of life is relatively unchanged, because whereas they would be studying under the masters of the Jeskai, they are now studying under Ojutai and the Dragon Masters, still learning martial arts, still learning sort of the ways of like like peace and combat, and still following a lot of those kind of Chinese martial arts kind of sort of styles as
Crouching
well.
Tiger, Hidden Dragon shit.
Yeah, I watched a lot of martial arts films, ranging from the kind of Shaw Brothers Hong Kong sort of
Sure.
36 Chambers of Shaolin, Shaolin versus Wu Tang, those kinds
Mm,
of films, all the way through to a lot of the early Jet Li films like
mm,
Tai Chi Master. I think that's one of them, is Tai Chi Master. There's a couple of really early Jet Li films which are cheesy as fuck. Some of them have Michelle Yeoh in as well. She pops up. There's also there's a Fist of Fury remake with Jet Li, which was a Bruce Lee film called Fist of Legend. The martial arts in it is staggeringly good. The story and the acting, not so much.
well,
But
yeah,
then I also watched through onto things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is obviously a big one. But again, more Jet Li films like Hero and also House of
yeah.
Flying Daggers as well
Oh man,
with
what a film!
Zhang Ziyi. Yeah, so like a big wide breadth of martial arts films I've watched a lot in my teens. So I think the aesthetic of the Jeskai are cool. So the Ojutai kind of keep on with that, but the thing with Ojutai is that he becomes quite tyrannical about the idea of knowledge. So although they're like martial arts training and their kind of peace combat balance is still there, the dragons become the keepers of knowledge, which kind of takes away the kind of Jeskai ideal,
Mm.
really.
But he literally wants to rewrite history, right? That's the whole
Yeah,
point.
100%.
Yeah.
The Abzan obviously become the Dramoka, and their way of life changes in as much as they no longer have contact with their ancestors through their kind of necromancy and their spirit trees and their ancestor trees. But they're by and large protected in their city fortresses, which is why Dagazar did what he did, because he
Yeah,
wanted to protect his
yeah.
clan.
Don't get me wrong. Like it benefit. Yeah, it didn't end up with them getting. And there was subjugation, but it was a very light form of subjugation.
Yeah. And then the Tima become the Ataka. Now, they are, even though they still live a nomadic lifestyle, I think they're quite harshly changed because all of
Mm,
their resources now are being fed directly to Ataka and her brood. So they have to constantly be killing mammoths and other
mm.
kind of beasts just to feed the dragons, and they are left with very little.
It's a bug's life, right? The ants having to feed the grasshoppers.
Yeah, it's 100% a Pug's life. We do see Yasova a lot more in the Kate Elliott Core 2019 stories, which is the
Yes.
Nicobolas Ugin arc, because the framing of that story is that we're seeing the lives of Ugin and Bolos in Dominaria through the shamanic tellings of a Jeskai or Ojutai, I suppose, ghost fire warrior who survived this purge, and Yasova and her clan and her granddaughters. So we do see a lot more of Yasova in the future, which is really, really cool. And then I guess the Sultai become the Silumgar, and the humans of the Silumgar don't have a good time, but the Naga and the Rakshasa are fucking lit. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's a real mixed bag. They don't just go, oh, everything's terrible for everyone. The dragons do, for some, make life very good on Tarkir, and for others, very bad. It's
I
kind of
mean,
an
yeah,
interesting dynamic.
arguably the plane is in a better position, right? As much as again the dragon washing rub people out the wrong way, it's like the plane technically is more abundant, it's flourishing more, like the systems in place, like they're battling each other less, right? They're able to live in more relative peace because individually the clans don't have to fight for the resources, they don't have to fight to stay alive, which inevitably will only ever be with each other rather than, having to, a status quo was reached, is what I feel like. And again, for better or for worse, some people ended up having to pay more. Like, was it worth all of the Sultai clan becoming, essentially zombified? Well, no. Was that ever going to go any other way? And were the Sultai douchebags in the first place? Yeah. So I don't feel like there's too much. I don't think it's easy to turn around to anyone in the Sultai and go, "Oh, you had it bad, didn't you, bud?" It's like, dude, you're in the Sultai. Like, whatever. Like, burn in hell, whatever.
What did you expect?
Yeah, exactly. Like, come on.
Yeah, it is interesting because I do see what you're saying about the fact that having tyrants and for want of a better word, fascist regimes brings a certain level of peace, which is
Mm.
the Empire from Star Wars argument.
Yeah,
um,
Jedi were bastards. They ruined everything.
well, maybe. I just sort of feel like the dampening and the curtailing of the clan's true identity. And you see it more so in the Jeskai and again the team. I'm going to keep banging on about them. Their very identities and their very magics are outlawed as heresy, as with the Abzan and their necromancy. So as much as they're not warring with each other, they're certainly not living their best life. And as
Mm.
far as planes go, Tarkir, I think, is the plane where like letting your fucking flag fly is kind of the whole vibe of the plane,
Yes,
being your
absolutely.
truest self. So yeah.
And then which side is truer? Again, we see two different
Well, which
sides of
yeah, it's
people.
true. The dragons don't
Yeah,
deserve to die and be wiped out either.
yeah.
Basically, Ugin and Bolas have fucked up yet another plane with their petty squabbles. That's
Well,
essentially what's happened.
didn't Ugin create Tarkir anyway? Right, he was the one who generated, made,
Well, no, he didn't create the plane,
but
but I think
he was instrumental in its formation and the way it kind of develops. Right.
he was like he was like their
So
brood brother.
I think it was accidental that the storms happened, right? And then from then on, it was like the Sorin thing of where like, oh, I guess I have to keep everything in balance then, and they became like kind of like how Sorin had to balance out the vampires and the
Mm.
with the Hellvault, that kind of thing. Like again, it's funny how Planeswalkers, as much as we don't see the crazy nonsense from like early formative years of the game of where they have giant massive ramifications on everything around them, you still have Planeswalkers like Sorin and Ugin who are old walkers that still have like this baggage they have to deal with. They still like, girl, I guess I got to go and look after my plane again. Oh, things
Mm.
have kicked up again, which is kind of interesting. Yeah, I guess it is one of these things. Like, was Sirik better being Dragonclaw, or was he better being the Hunt Caller? Like, who knows? I mean, obviously Zurgo was, as much as he's in a much more diminished role as a Bell striker. Is that a better place for him than the douche nozzle that he was, who potentially killed Narset in the other timeline? Again, who knows? I guess it's nice to be able to see both options. Anna Fenza, better alive or as a spirit? I think she'd have an opinion on that. But again,
Mm.
I guess they presented like it's almost like a lose-lose situation, right? And it's not a matter of where or what necessarily happened. It's who the people were and how they represented themselves, how they wanted to present themselves to each other, what they stood for, who they wanted to be. As you say, it was a massive identity thing, right? The entire plane's identity changed, and with that, all of the individual characters. So identity was a big part of it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't really know what's more to say about this story. I think it's just something you have to kind of read, and I do also encourage people to read the entirety of the Tarkir arc, even if it's not really a set that you've played. I mean, it's quite a popular set for Commander in EDH, I suppose, and it was a very popular limited set. So I think most Magic players have had quite a lot of interaction with Tarkir, which we've never gone back there. It was a 3-set block, but it's
Yeah. How
it's
can
only that
you?
one set. Oh
Because
no, of
it's
course you can't. No,
yeah.
but it's I would encourage you to go and read all these stories from start to finish, because we haven't really even touched on, with this particular story, there's a whole arc with Sorin, there's a whole arc with Ugin.
Yeah.
Sarkhan doesn't appear in this story outside of just being mentioned by Yasova. Sarkhan is pretty much in every other story. So like, you should, if you want to read more about Sarkhan, go check him out.
Well, it even
Like,
has an episode about the Lithomancer, right? And it kind of talks about how the Eldrazi were
yep.
trapped and that kind of thing. It really, the scope that this storyline, we said at the beginning, the scope that this storyline kind of affects in terms of the Magic arc was monumental, like massive. So yeah, it's a really good one to dig into because it will mention so many other points, and it's one of the few arcs, or one of maybe the last arc that we'll have, that just kind of weaves everything a bit together and kind of shows you this multiverse does all affect each other. It's not just stories in isolation that maybe have a little bit of crossover because, oh look, there's Narset in the library. Oh, in Ixalan. What of it? Nothing. But back then everything affected everything. Sorry, Corey. Yeah, sorry. It's the eyes. I think it's the eyes.
I know. I do it all the time as well.
Because I did this with Ragavan as well. I think it's just the fact they were both eyes. I just like, oh no, that was Kaladesh that I fucked up. Man, I just fuck up everything apparently. Never mind. Good.
Just get good.
Yeah, right, yeah. Sorry, buddy. I'll try harder.
But yeah, I'm now scanning back over this story, just reading excerpts from it, and it's just there's a Shu Yun line which I really liked, where it was oh yeah, here we go. So this is where the Khans are kind of worried about there being a betrayer in their midst. It's Shuyun and Alesha who are kind of having a back and forth about, people think maybe it's Shuyun who's betrayed them because Shuyun's called this meeting, and suddenly the dragons are attacking this stronghold. And Alesha says, "You'd forfeit your own life and all of ours if you thought it would save your clan," said Alesha. Her two bodyguards stood behind her, hands on their weapons. Shuyun hesitated. "Yes," he said finally. He shrugged. "Honestly, I don't think it would." And it's just the fact that Shuyun is so calm that he would admit to being potentially a betrayer in the situation where people are accusing him of being a betrayer, because he knows that if he just goes, "Yeah, and so would you," that's not our issue right now.
Yeah, the honesty.
Situation, yeah.
The honesty is so good. It kind of, again, it shows honor between them all, right? Again,
Hmm.
warring factions can't help it. That's just the way the plane was set up and the way the systems are in place. But it's nice to see kind of how some of them are like, yeah, very willing to go, well, whatever. Like, if this is going to be the end, like, all bets are off. Let's sit down and have a cup of cocoa about it, right? You know,
Hmm.
like it is one of those moments of where these kinds of scenes can go two ways. As you said, they can either be massive bore fest like they are in Skyrim, where you have to sit through that fucking meeting every time and you can't skip it, and it's the worst part of the game. Or it can be like some of the more interesting parts because you finally get everyone kind of being honest instead of having to play the role, right? They're just kind of going, well, all the bets are off, right? I mean, this is who we really are and this is how we're really going to interact, and it's quite a nice balancing act.
Mm.
It's also really nice that the two characters that are mentioned in this story that didn't get cards being Rayhan and Shadiqui, I think right at the end.
Shadiki.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they both actually got partnered commanders in the same, in the same set, which is quite nice for them to actually go back and go, oh, let's at least finish off all, because there are a lot of legendary characters obviously in the set, not as much as ones in like current day, because that's the new fucking meme. Half the cards in the set are legendary characters and commanders, but back then that was still quite a lot of, because you had all of the Dragon Lords, all of the Khans, the new Dragon Lords, new Khans, old Khans, like, so it was quite nice that they actually went back and finally gave those two cards as well. Again, maybe it's just the fact the story needed it so much, and it's good to have everyone represented. But
Mm.
yeah, no, really, really well delivered. It has a good lead in. The pace, it hits immediately. So it sets the play up, and then you get a really satisfying conclusion for each of the different clans right at the end. And I think it's very, very well handled. The dragons come off really poorly as well, which I quite like. There wasn't a lot of sympathy necessarily to anyone outside of Colligan. Like the way that Ujatai comes across, and I always find it interesting how they personify non-human sentient species, because obviously they've got to have a slightly different way of thinking, a slightly different perspective. And in this story, they just went, nah, they're mostly just douchebags.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Ojutai comes off a little bit better in some of the Dragons of Tarkir storylines.
Yes, yeah.
Because you do see that Ojutai does genuinely care about teaching the humans what they think they need to be taught. Like that's the trade-off, is that Ojutai is very happy to impart knowledge and to train people, but the knowledge is still kept behind lock and key with the dragons. Like they will only impart so much. And yeah, whereas Ataka and Silumgar especially are both just sort of very crazed and very selfish and greedy and don't really give a fuck about their clans, quote unquote.
They're more primal, right? They don't have less
Ataka especially.
politics.
Ataka is just a feral dragon who wants to live all the time.
And I guess reasonably they were at a point of this, had it not been for Ugin being put into stasis, they were at a point of where the humans were kind of killing them off. So I can understand why they overreact, so much. And it's like, well, cool. If you're going to hunt us to extinction, then we'll get. In fact, if anything, the dragons were more reasonable because they didn't hunt the humans to extinction. They all went, okay, as long as you understand it with the big boys now, then cool, that's great. So maybe actually they have more humility than I give them credit for.
Yeah. I mean, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of Jamoka, who is these, all intents and purposes, Abzan Dragon Lord. I mean, they did get lip service in other stories, or they did get represented, but I just kind of you don't really, within the context of all the other dragons, like it's harder to think about like, well, how are they with their things? Like I think from what I remember of the other stories, Jamoka is very brutal in her destruction of the Abzan way and like lays siege to all the Abzan citadels and whatnot. But as soon as Dagatar sort of bends the knee, she becomes like quite benevolent, I think. I could be wrong, which is why I think we needed a better reminder rather than just seeing Dramoka looking a little bit. Dagatar looking a little bit sad that he had to give orders that he didn't quite believe in to kill off the other Khans. Because that's essentially what we see, is that their religion has been outlawed, even though they kind of all still practice it in their head, kind of thing. Like the Abzan aren't gone because they're still doing their thing, but they're just doing it out of sight, out of mind, kind of thing. But there we go. I think everything kind of gets quite neatly tied together. Certainly a far fucking cry from things like War of the Spark.
yeah, that's the thing. It's night and day, right? It's where every time I read the end of, because they do like obviously little like lines in between to kind of show, and that's the end of that little arc, and that's the end of that arc, and it almost has this kind of like this beat, this like lovely musical beat to it. You're like, yeah, nice, cool. And then with with Warrior Spark is every extra chapter I'm like, oh, stop, oh god, no, please stop it, good god, oh no, yeah, and you don't get that kind of satisfying oh lovely at the end of it. I mean, to be fair, at the end of it, like I think the last line is pretty pokey. The future isn't the idea of the future isn't yet written. It's up to us to write it together one day at a time. And it's obviously Yasova speaking, which is really nice. Obviously, they are like the forward shaman, like the seers of the future and everything. But it's quite a nice like way to frame it. And I guess I don't know if at this point we knew we were going to go into Dragons of Tarkir, but it's a very kind of nudge, wink, wink kind of thing of being like, look, I mean, we have essentially changed everything, but that doesn't mean we can't write a better story.
Sure. Yeah. And again, it is quite nice to come from the clan, which kind of sees into the future.
Yes.
So, well, sort of. It's very vague what they can and can't do. But yeah, that's kind of what they're doing. All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up there then. I mean, it's very clear that we absolutely love this story. I don't think we will be doing book club episodes about stories that we actively dislike because it's easier to like things. Or it's nicer to like things than it's to dislike things. Rants also on this podcast tend to come off a lot more naturally when we kind of in the moment realize just how ridiculous the world is, as opposed to going into a podcast episode being like, well, I hate this thing and I'm going to make you hate it too.
Yeah, right. Like doing a whole episode of critique doesn't seem good for anyone.
No. So it's clear that we enjoyed this episode. Did you enjoy this episode? And by episode, I mean story episode, because of course you enjoyed this episode of the podcast because every episode we do is amazing. Let us know on Twitter at mtflavouring if you enjoyed Khanfall. If you haven't yet read Khanfall or the Tarkir storylines, in which case, I mean, I don't know why you're here, but thank you for listening, and I hope we didn't spoil it too much. But let us know what your favourite Tarkir stories are. Let us know what other episodes you would like us to do in our MTG Book Club series. We've done one on family values, which is a Ravnica story. We did one of the Strixhaven stories as it came out. I think that may be something that we do in the future, but we'll see for time constraints. Obviously, we've done this Tarkir story. I know people have suggested ones in the past. Please keep suggesting them. Let us know. You can send emails to mtflavouring@gmail.com as well. My personal Twitter is at AndyManface. Nathan's, yours is
at the Fox in the Moon.
Do you have any final words?
Right, okay, funnily enough, I tried to remember the one from last week, and I forgot it again, but I've actually got a different one now. When we get to this part of the episode, because I always listen back to the episodes, I always instinctively hear our play-out music kind of trickle in. I'm like, is it started yet? And obviously it's never going to play, because this is before it's like been finalised and played over the top.
I'm not live playing outro.
No, exactly, but in my mind, as soon as we get to the, like, reading out, like, our Twitters, I hear it in my head. It's really funny. Yeah, so that's my final thought. My
okay.
Funny thing. Yeah.
My little final words is after the latest Nintendo Direct and E3 announcements and all that kind of jazz. There's a new trailer for Zelda Breath of the Wild 2.
Oh my fucking god! Right? Holy shit! It looks great.
It looks great.
Sky stuff.
They didn't give anything away, and also they didn't reference anything really that was in the kind of little sneaky peeky trailer which they did about a year and a half, 2 years ago, which had you kind of, was it Ganon? Was it maybe not Ganon awaking from the dead underneath Hyrule Castle? They didn't touch on any of that.
Yeah, we're still not sure, right? I mean, you see a little bit of a ghost of Ganon, or what looks like a skeletal version of him. Again, we haven't seen a definitive. We saw the big beastly bit of Ganon, like, at the end of Breath of the Wild 1, but we haven't had like a definitive Ganon character outside of being the big beastie thing. So I think
we haven't seen Ganondorf for quite some time,
which is interesting.
Exciting. This isn't a Zelda podcast, but just thought I would throw that out there. Yeah, that's cool. All right, guys. Other than that, all that remains for me to say is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.